Jake Beaumont-Nesbitt ist geschäftsführender Direktor vom IMFF, International Music Managers Forum. Herzlich willkommen. Walter van Holst ist Mitglied von, ich spreche das richtig aus, Vrijschrift. Die Organisation setzt sich für freies Wissen und Kultur ein. Neben mir Petra Kammerevert. Sie ist ebenso wie ich Schattenberichterstatterin im Kulturausschuss und für uns drei, die quasi hier von der sozialdemokratischen Fraktion Schattenberichterstatter sind, ist das sehr wichtig, heute gemeinsam mit Ihnen das Thema zu diskutieren und auch Anregungen zu bekommen für unsere Abänderungsanträge, die wir dann auch in weiterer Folge stellen werden. Ich möchte Sie noch darauf aufmerksam machen, dass wir diese Veranstaltung auch webstreamen, sodass das auch von außerhalb gesehen werden kann. Und darf jetzt gleich dich, Petra, bitten, die Moderation des heutigen Tages zu übernehmen. Danke.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank, Josef. Auch von meiner Seite ein herzliches Willkommen, vor allen Dingen an unsere Referentinnen und Referenten. Ich will mich auch nicht sehr lange mit Vorreden aufhalten, sondern möchte sofort das Wort an Francoise geben, uns einen Einblick in die Diskussionen im Rechtsausschuss zu geben und vor allen Dingen natürlich in welche Richtung Sozialdemokraten im Rechtsausschuss bezüglich der vorgelegten Richtlinie denken. Francoise, schön, dass du da bist. Du hast das Wort.
Merci à vous deux d'avoir pris l'initiative de cette réunion et puis bienvenue à vous tous au Parlement européen pour discuter de ce projet de directive qui est extrêmement importante pour tout le secteur culturel, notamment des artistes, des ayants droit, puisque c'est la façon dont sont perçus vos droits, redistribués vos droits, gérés vos droits, qui est en ligne de compte, c'est-à-dire comment vous allez être rémunéré dans votre travail. Et soyez certains que c'est vraiment cette préoccupation qui guide nos travaux, c'est-à-dire que au-delà des questions de transparence des sociétés de gestion collective, de gouvernance des sociétés de gestion collective, nous avons à cœur de nous préoccuper et d'être conscients que cet argent qui est géré et qui est redistribué, c'est le fruit du travail des artistes, des interprètes et de l'ensemble des acteurs de la création culturelle. Donc, la directive a deux grands chapitres relativement indépendants l'un de l'autre. Une première partie qui concerne l'ensemble des sociétés de gestion collective, que ce soit dans le secteur de la musique ou dans le secteur de l'audiovisuel, de l'art dramatique et autres, et qui pose des questions de gouvernance, de transparence. La deuxième partie concerne exclusivement le secteur de la musique et créer la possibilité d'émettre des licences multiterritoriales, pour notamment le secteur de la musique. Alors, sur la première partie, les objectifs, vous le savez, c'est notamment des questions de gouvernance et de transparence de la gestion, et ça ne pose pas problème d'émettre des règles générales de bonne gouvernance et de transparence, notamment dans les États où les sociétés de gestion collective sont déjà contrôlées par une autorité nationale sur le contrôle contrôle de la gestion des finances. Nous avons, sur le groupe socialiste, toutefois, une grande préoccupation et une préoccupation annexe. La grande préoccupation, c'est de préserver le statut des sociétés de gestion collective. Bon, vous vous souvenez peut-être qu'au moment de la discussion sur la directive service, les sociétés de gestion collective avaient été exclues de cette directive service. Mais cette exclusion n'est pas complètement affirmée et il y avait dans un premier temps, dans la proposition initiale de la Commission, une tendance à considérer que les sociétés de gestion collective étaient des entreprises, que donc elles étaient ouvertes à la concurrence, et il y a même des articles qui s'appliquent à elles sur l'audit et la gestion des comptes, qui sont les mêmes que celles que l'on applique aux entreprises commerciales. Donc, dans la procédure de travail que nous avons fait avec la Commission et avec le rapporteur au fond, qui est une VPE française, Marielle Gallo, et l'ensemble des autres shadows, nous avons d'abord posé cette question et dit que les sociétés de gestion collective n'étaient pas des entreprises comme les autres, puisque justement elles étaient une gestion collective de revenus qui devaient être redistribués parmi les membres de la société. Ce n'était pas le fruit d'un commerce ou d'un bénéfice. Donc cet objectif a été entendu, notamment par la rapporteure, et moi pour ma part, j'affirme, et si ce n'est pas pris en compte par la rapporteure, je déposerai des amendements dans ce sens, pour garantir aux sociétés de gestion collective un statut de société à but non lucratif, alors soit de mutuelle, soit de coopérative. On verra ce que l'on peut faire avec le droit européen, puisque de toute façon les deux possibilités existent. Dans le chapitre gouvernance, nous voulons aussi préserver, ne pas imposer un modèle unique de gouvernance, préserver les disparités dans les différents États membres et ne pas défaire ce qui marche bien. Et nous aurons peut-être des incitations pour les sociétés de gestion collective qui regroupent plusieurs catégories d'ayants droit, pour que l'ensemble des catégories, toutes ces catégories soient représentées dans les instances de direction et de décision de la société de gestion collective, et que la démocratie interne soit garantie par une gestion en collège, quand cela apparaît une nécessité pour préserver les différents intérêts des différents ayants droit. Là aussi, je pense qu'il ne devrait pas y avoir de problème majeur pour l'obtenir. Nous avons aussi pointé une difficulté d'appliquer le même modèle aux différents secteurs, c'est-à-dire pour les sociétés de gestion du secteur de la musique et les sociétés de gestion de l'audiovisuel ou des arts dramatiques, puisque ce ne sont pas les mêmes types de droits qui sont perçus et qu'ils ne sont pas gérés de la même façon. Donc là aussi, nous devrions pouvoir établir des différences entre les différents secteurs. La problématique qui se pose dans cette partie-là de la directive concerne d'autres types d'intermédiaires entre les utilisateurs et les artistes, les ayants droit, qui sont des acteurs commerciaux de collecte de droits, qui n'ont pas de fonctionnement de société de gestion collective et qui, de ce fait, peuvent choisir leurs ayants droit et choisir même les types d'utilisateurs avec lesquels ils vont traiter. Hein. Et que donc, n'ayant pas l'universalité des droits, l'universalité de la récupération des droits et un très large éventail d'ayants droit à gérer, peuvent réduire leurs frais de gestion et voilà, et qui pourraient avoir une concurrence déloyale par rapport aux sociétés de gestion collective. Mon point de vue est qu'il faut distinguer ces acteurs collecteurs de droits des sociétés de gestion collective afin qu'ils ne soient pas mis en concurrence. La façon dont on va les distinguer n'est pas encore complètement établie. Moi, j'attends aussi vos réactions et vos avis pour avancer dans cette distinction. Est-ce que ces collecteurs doivent ensuite se situent comme des partenaires des sociétés de gestion collective et les sociétés de gestion collective gèrent tout? Est-ce qu'on fait un statut particulier? Est-ce qu'on le pointe dans la directive société de gestion collective? Est-ce qu'elles sont en dehors? Voilà. Toutes les options sont ouvertes. Voilà, on a repéré le problème, maintenant il faut lui trouver la solution. Bien évidemment, le dernier objectif est de préserver la protection de la diversité culturelle et préserver aussi la diversité des artistes, des œuvres et des répertoires. Alors, le deuxième aspect de la directive sur les licences multiterritoriales, même si dans son objectif on en saisit bien l'utilité, hein, que sur le marché européen, cette fragmentation des licences par État membre est préjudiciable à la bonne diffusion des œuvres et au rayonnement de la culture européenne. Il reste malgré tout que la mise en œuvre d'un modèle reste un peu plus compliquée. Hein. Alors la proposition de la Commission européenne est que une société de gestion pourrait devenir le guichet unique pour plusieurs autres sociétés de gestion et donc gérer des licences multiterritoriales. On comprend bien que ça serait sur la base du volontariat et que l'objectif est d'agréger des répertoires pour pouvoir les gérer, différents répertoires, de manière unique. Bon. Ça demande un gros effort pour la société de gestion collective qui va se porter candidate pour faire ce travail-là. Il est bien évident que la gestion de répertoires minoritaires, on va dire, dont la diffusion et le rayonnement est moins répandu que les répertoires, on va dire, anglophones, hein, pour aller vite par exemple, est beaucoup plus difficile et la collecte du droit est moins aisée. Donc des bénéfices attendus sont moins importants. Donc il ne faut pas que, quand elle consent à cet effort, elle soit mise en concurrence avec des sociétés qui obtiennent des licences multiterritoriales pour des petits morceaux du répertoire européen dont la division et la collecte du droit est plus aisée. Voilà. Donc, mon point de vue, c'est que pour préserver cette diffusion de la diversité culturelle de l'Union européenne, il faut que l'on soutienne la démarche d'agrégation des répertoires et que l'on évite que les sociétés de gestion qui feront cet effort-là au nom de plusieurs autres soient un petit peu préservées de la mise en concurrence sauvage d'autres instances de diffusion, d'autres collectes, d'autres entités qui obtiendraient des licences multiterritoriales pour une partie seulement du répertoire européen. Voilà les objectifs et comment ils se déclinent dans les détails. Je vais vous quelques mots pour que vous ayez en tête le calendrier de décision. La commission des affaires juridiques, qui est compétente au fond, examinera le projet de rapport de la rapporteure donc le 29 et 30 mai. Et nous avons une deadline de dépôt des amendements jusqu'au 4 juin. Donc vous voyez que vous êtes dans le créneau où vous pouvez intervenir encore, faire des propositions. Nous prendrons le débat de prise en considération des amendements le 19-20 juin pour un vote en jury sans doute en début juillet. Donc, vous voyez qu'on a encore du temps. Nous avons déjà des avis qui ont été adoptés, ou pardon, qui ont été déposés, ils ne sont pas encore adoptés. En ITRE, un avis a été déposé le 13 avril, avec un dépôt d'amendement le 15, voilà, et un vote le 20 juin. Et en culture, vous avez déposé l'avis le 22 avril avec une deadline le 6 mai et un vote le 18 mai. Donc, même si les délais dans les commissions pour avis est là maintenant en ce moment, vous voyez bien que pour la commission au fond, vous avez encore le temps de faire valoir votre point de vue. Je vous remercie et je suis vraiment très à l'écoute de ce que vous pourrez nous dire les uns et les autres.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank, Francoise, dass du uns hier einen Überblick über die Diskussionen im Rechtsausschuss gegeben hast, auch nochmal die Fragen aufgeworfen hast, die wir noch beantworten müssen, wo wir noch Lösungen für die identifizierten Probleme finden müssen. Ich hoffe, dass wir heute vielleicht in dieser Veranstaltung ein Stück dazu beitragen können, vielleicht die eine oder andere noch offene Frage auch zu beantworten. Ich freue mich daher ganz besonders, dass Herr Drexl heute Morgen so früh aufgestanden ist, um aus München hier zu uns nach Brüssel zu kommen. Josef Weidenholzer hat eben schon gesagt, er ist Direktor des Max-Planck-Instituts für Urheberrecht und Wettbewerbsrecht. Dieses Institut gilt, glaube ich, als ist ein absolutes Experteninstitut bei allen Fragen des Urheber- und des Wettbewerbsrechts. Und insofern freue ich mich sehr darauf, dass er uns aus seiner fachlichen Sicht als Jurist nochmal das ein oder andere, hoffe ich, mit auf den Weg geben kann, was die Bewertung des Kommissionsvorschlags angeht und vielleicht auch die ein oder andere Idee uns noch mit auf den Weg bringen kann, wie wir diesen Vorschlag der Kommission vielleicht noch besser machen können und an welchen Stellen wir vielleicht noch mal ran sollten, um zu gucken, dass diese Richtlinie auch wirklich eine schlagkräftige Richtlinie wird im Sinne der Künstlerinnen und Künstler, aber auch im Sinne der Verwerter, für die wir es natürlich auch einfacher machen wollen, an Rechte zu bekommen, dass beide Seiten hier einen vernünftigen Weg finden, wie sie erstens ihr Geld bekommen und zweitens aber auch Rechte verwerten können. Herr Drexl, Sie haben das Wort. Schön, dass Sie da sind.
Herzlichen Dank. Ich darf mich zuerst bedanken für die Einladung. Es freut uns ganz extrem, dass wir auch gehört werden vom Gesetzgeber. Das ist für uns außerordentlich wichtig, denn wenn wir uns zu Wort melden mit einer Stellungnahme, wie es hier auch passiert ist, dann verfolgt das auch einen Zweck. Wir hoffen, mit unserer Aufklärungsarbeit gegenüber der Öffentlichkeit natürlich dann auch Einfluss nehmen zu können auf die Gesetzgebung. I would like to switch to English. I think it's better for the majority of people here in the room to understand me more directly in a way. Our institute has presented comments on the Commission proposal at the beginning of this year, and I have to say these comments were among the most difficult ones that we have ever drafted. Maybe these are the most difficult ones, which is mostly due to the high level of complexity of the Commission's proposal. However, the debate has continued, and therefore also in the ongoing debate with different institutions, also the German government, who tried to bring in its view on the council, but also people especially here in the parliament and the different committees. I drafted another paper which is entitled Questions and Answers, and maybe that's more user-friendly in a way. First, it's more readable for a person who might not be so familiar with the whole field and maybe has less legal expertise also. And secondly, it takes into account certain issues that attracted higher attention in the later development, especially if I may mention one which is also very important in my presentation, the relationship between the Commission's proposal for this directive and the Service Directive. In the comments we basically said don't apply the Service Directive to collective rights administration for, I think, very, very valid reasons. However, it's also clear that one can argue, and I would also share this view, that especially when we have cross-border licensing, that this is a cross-border service. And then we have to think about how does the Service Directive work, and does it work properly, and do we have to make adjustments? And my impression is that the Commission always makes the argument, yes, we have to apply the Service Directive, but it never explained how it works and what it means for the existing system of collective rights administration. So this is a new focus that I would like to make. I should also add a few words on who I am actually, because it really matters. It was mentioned that our institute is specialized in intellectual property, including copyright and competition law. I have both a background in copyright law and competition law. I'm very much in favor of applying competition law also to collective rights administration. European history shows that it was very important to have application of European competition law to collective societies in order to preserve the rights of the authors, right? So it created some kind of framework regulation. But competition law is ex post regulation. It comes too late, and therefore I'm a very strong partisan of having an additional field of regulation, a sector-specific regulation for collective rights management. In addition, I have to tell you that I'm also very close to the practice of collecting societies. I'm an author myself, an academic author, and I represent academic authors in the German Collecting Society for Literature or Writings, Verwertungsgesellschaften, and I'm also a member of one of the supervisory bodies, the Administrative Council. So I'm familiar with the daily life of a specific group of collecting societies, which is not necessarily one for music. But I speak on my own behalf. I'm not representing Verwertungsgesellschaften here. Please believe in this. So I think I can have a very, very independent voice. However, it's my own benefit to know about how it works. I found my work within Verwertungsgesellschaften very important because I know also about the internal conflicts between different groups of right holders, which is extremely important. And my feeling is that the Commission is not fully aware of the tensions that we have inside collecting societies concerning different groups of right holders. First, the reason. First, I would like to make a pledge or somehow to explain to you what I believe in. I think that Europe needs strong and credible collecting societies in the interest basically of everybody, of right holders, users, consumers who want to have access to a large diversity of works, especially in music, and cultural diversity. In order to achieve this goal, we are in need of strong and credible collecting societies and effective control of those collecting societies. If we don't have state control, effective control, then those collecting societies are not credible. They may not fulfill their functions. There are 4 paradigms that I would identify on which the Commission builds its proposal. The 4 paradigms are correct to a certain extent for many, many issues that we have in collective rights administration, but they do not apply to all situations or to all problems. And that's a problem of the Commission proposal at large. I would like to mention the 4 paradigms, and then I will explain why I think that those 4 paradigms are to a certain extent incomplete. We need more thought given to those paradigms, and then maybe we also have to rethink a little bit the Commission proposal or what we actually need for the regulation of collecting societies in Europe. First paradigm. The Commission very much has the focus on works of music. Copyright is much larger. There are different kinds of categories of works. And in other fields of copyright law, the problems are very, very different. Collective rights administration for literature is different from music. But the Commission proposes a directive that applies to all fields of copyright law. Secondly, the Commission conceives, as it was already said, collecting societies as undertakings that basically help authors to license their rights to users. So the basis is we have exclusive rights held by authors, and the collecting societies license those exclusive rights. The Commission has largely ignored the field of statutory remuneration rights, which plays a major role in European copyright legislation. We need European legislation as a second pillar, European legislation on collective rights administration, as a second pillar to those substantive rules on statutory remuneration rights, and that's missing. The proposal doesn't live up to this challenge. Thirdly, the Commission, of course, in view of promoting the internal market, largely thinks in terms of cross-border licensing. That's fine. We will have more cross-border licensing in the future. But even in the field of music, a large part of what collecting societies are doing will also in the future be done territorially. How can you imagine the collective administration of music when it comes to public performance in nightclubs, supermarkets, and so on? And we will still have territorial distribution or territorial broadcasts via radio and so on. This will continue to exist, not to mention other fields. In literature, we have very much national markets for the distribution of works. Sorry. Fourth point, I already mentioned it, the standpoint of the Commission that the Service Directive should be fully applied and that there should be no exceptions. This can certainly be more justified in the light of the previous paradigms, but if you take the other aspects into account of collective rights administration, it already becomes much more questionable. So I basically already mentioned a few things. Works of music, yes, but we also have writings, visual arts, the resale right for visual arts where we have a statutory remuneration rights. This directive also has to serve the needs of those different fields of creative works. Licensing of exclusive rights, much too narrow. Why are statutory remuneration rights so important for collective rights administration? If you take Verwertungsgesellschaften, which I know best in Germany, I think more than 90% of the income of this collecting society is generated by statutory remuneration right, mostly based on the private copy levy system in Germany. And this is also the case in many other member states of the European Union. I think that statutory remuneration right will play a much bigger role in the future, because we also discuss such rights for digital exploitation. Legislation will still come, but we will talk much more about statutory rights. Statutory remuneration rights always have a public dimension. The legislator decides we should have such rights, and then somebody has to administer those. And there are only the collecting societies that can do it. So collecting societies immediately become a public dimension. They fulfill a role for the administration of statutory rights conceived by the legislature. Thirdly, whenever we have statutory rights, those rights are usually, or not always, but usually introduced in order to strike a balance between easier access of the public, of the consumer to works, and the interest of the right holders to be remunerated. So also in this regard, to strike the balance and to control that actually the balance is kept in the administration, we need public control. Fourthly, those income has to be distributed. We have two very different kinds of right holders within collecting societies, namely the authors and performing artists. I will call them the creative people, right? And those who had acquired rights from authors and performing artists, like publishers and producers. And they are both members of the same collecting societies. And it's within the collecting societies that the decision is made who should get how much. Do you find anything on this in the proposal? Yes, but probably the Commission didn't understand the issue by talking about equal distribution or keeping a principle of equality or equity, whatever, regarding different categories of right holders. I think we can't deal with those two groups of right holders the same way. They are different because the first group, these are the creative people, and the other ones have acquired rights. That's a fundamental distinction. So trying to get a balance here is a very, very important task, and we need public supervision, state control on guaranteeing that the weaker part or the weaker right holders, namely the creative ones, get what they deserve when the money is distributed. And cultural diversity is also an extremely important issue, especially when it comes to multi-territorial licensing, because the question really here is whether all works that are created have equal access to the market, and whether also consumers get equal access to the market, because the licensing system is working the same way for all different kinds of works. If this is not the case, we will have much more uniformity on the radio and so on. There are two major flaws also regarding cross-border licensing and digital exploitation, which is another focus. I already mentioned that territorial licensing will play a major role. At first glance, maybe, some people might say, well, maybe in this field, since it's territorial, we don't need European legislation, that's something for national legislation. Wrong. Why? Imagine music played in a restaurant here in Brussels. Who is the right holder for this music? It's probably not a Belgian composer. Right? So the money has to be transferred somehow from the Belgian collecting society to the society to which the composer is a member. So practically, when we have exploitation also in a territorial setting, works of foreign authors are largely used and we have to think about the transfer of money between the collecting societies. This is extremely important, and this is also an aspect which is not considered by the proposal. And this is an issue, of course, for European legislation. The Commission relies on the Service Directive, but does not analyze the consequences, and most importantly, go through the proposal and the different provision. The Commission often says member states should guarantee, member states should provide. But I ask you the question, which member state? The member state of the establishment of the collecting society, or the member state of the license? This makes a fundamental difference, and this has to be knitted into the system of the Service Directive. This has to be clarified, and the Commission hasn't done this. So to simply say there is an obligation of member state to guarantee certain principles, it's nice, but which member state? This still needs to be answered. What we have to distinguish, I mentioned this before, when we analyze the directive, is the licensing of exclusive rights and the management of remuneration rights. And there's something in between. We also have exclusive rights that can only be managed by collecting societies for different reasons. For example, the cable regional transmission right for TV programs and radios broadcasts. So this belongs more to the second part. So it's not so clear-cut. Why does this distinction matter? Of course, one can make the argument that this matters for state control. It's easier to justify state control for the management of remuneration rights and also for the application of the Service Directive, because remuneration rights are mostly based on national legislation. Also, when we have European rules, they are implemented very differently by the member states. So the application of the country where the works are used, of the law of this country, this is very important, and to apply the Service Directive in this regard obviously creates a problem. But when we are in the field of exclusive rights, then maybe the Service Directive works much better, and maybe we are less in need of state control. But you will see it's not that clear-cut. There is also a case for state control for exclusive rights, and we may also need adjustments concerning the Service Directive with regard to exclusive rights. Both fields are certainly issues for European legislation, because we have cross-border aspects in both fields. That's very clear. A very tricky issue is how to conceive the system of control. The directive is largely silent on this point. In the last title, you find a few provisions on this. But the Commission does not say whether sanctions and measures, as the term is used, or the terms are used by the directive or the proposal. It's not quite clear whether this leads to ex ante control or ex post control. And that's a crucial point. It seems to me, when I read the proposal, that the Commission tends to argue if we empower the right holders as members of collecting societies, and if they are free to choose between different collecting societies, then competition will do the job. That's correct, but it's also wrong. Why is it correct? Of course, if you have choice, competition will also guarantee higher levels of quality. That's the logic of competition. But the question is whether this will work appropriately. There's the other assumption that all right holders can become members of collecting societies, and then by being members they can influence a well-working and functioning of the collecting societies. And this, it seems to me, all those assumptions lead the Commission to the conclusion that they don't have, or the Commission or the directive doesn't have to be very concrete about the enforcement or control system in the field of collective rights administration. I think that this approach is insufficient, and it's also flawed. First point, right holders are very often very much limited in choice when they decide which collecting societies they prefer. Of course, there are cultural limitations when we talk about authors. They speak their languages, they want to communicate with their collecting societies. but there is also the law of the largest market. If you are a writer for Polish literature, what is your major market? It's Poland, it's not Germany, it's not the UK, it's not France. From an economic perspective, this author would behave very irrationally if he didn't join the Polish Collecting Society. Because the Polish Collecting Society will collect most of the income in Poland, and there are only administrative costs in Poland. If he joins another collecting society, then he will incur two administrative cost burdens by his own collecting society abroad and the Polish collecting society. So this needs to be taken into account. The Commission only thinks about major publishing companies for music who can freely choose. Yes, they can, and for them it doesn't matter because the same kind of music is played everywhere. But that's not the situation of most of the right holders. It's completely different. And then you have to deal with a monopoly, a national monopoly. Not all collecting societies are membership driven. We have very different systems. In Greece, you don't find a single collecting society that is membership driven. These are private businesses put up by individuals who think that it's good to have collective rights administration. In Germany, we have a very mixed system. The majority are not membership driven or open as private law associations. And there are valid reasons for this. When it's about TV stations, maybe we can have a different system than for music composers or writers. So this also would need to be discussed. Not all right holders qualify as members. When we have statutory remuneration rights, once you create a work, you qualify to get the remuneration, but maybe you only do it once. If you write a PhD thesis at one point in life and then you never write again, you should get your copy, private copy levy, of course, and you get it from Verwertungsgesellschaften, but you will never become a member. And of course, there are members with small repertoires and members with large repertoires, and collecting societies have to distinguish. If you accept all authors, then maybe you have a majority vote by those who contribute very little economically. So the principle of democracy, nice to hear, but it's about economic rights, and right holders contribute differently in different volumes, and this needs to be taken into account when collecting societies define membership rules. It's now a big issue in Verwertungsgesellschaften also, and there are some authors who simply don't want to become members. They are free, and that's a right of all citizens in Europe. You are not under an obligation to become a member of any private association. We have the freedom of association, no obligation to become a member. I don't see that the Commission has understood this. So many problems in this regard. The principle of competition, another reason why it can't work. Take again the Polish writer. He becomes a member of the Polish society. And now take a composer, it's a better example. And his music is also played in other countries. Of course, who guarantees that the collecting society of another country administers his rights in the context of reciprocal representation agreements appropriately? So when it comes to territorial administration, right holders usually only choose one collecting society which they join, but they have to rely on the working of all collecting societies in the whole of the European Union and beyond. You don't have a choice. You have to rely on the well-functioning of all of them when it comes to territorial exploitation. So the argument that competition will do the job is wrong. It certainly doesn't help in the field of territorial exploitation. And post-control is not effective. What can you do at best? At one point in time, maybe after many years, you discover this is a collecting society where we have scandals, where the administration doesn't work nicely, well enough. What can you do as an authority? Close down the business? The person who will be harmed is the right holder, whom you want to protect. So that's not very helpful. Also countries that have effective systems of control never use that measure because it would harm those whom you want to protect. So to have ex-ante control, to have a look at whether it works nicely, whether the statutes are such that there is sufficient influence, that there is the capability of running such a business, all this would be very helpful, would be much better to have. Yeah, I know it's time is running. I said a few words on authorization system. Maybe that's also something for discussion, because I know that from some of the committees there are already some proposals which go in an interesting direction, and maybe that's a good point. A few words on the service directive. I think that's really important. Collecting societies provide cross-border services in 3 regards. First, when they accept foreign right holders, when they provide a service to the country of the residence of the right holder. Secondly, which is the focus of the Commission, when we have cross-border licenses to users in another country. But also thirdly, when collecting societies cooperate among each other in the framework of reciprocal agreements, because then we have services between different national collecting societies. The Service Directive, what does it provide for? Most important principle, Article 16, paragraph 1, subparagraph 3, litera B, the principle of free access and exercise. So this means if a collecting society is established in one country, it should also be allowed to do its business in another country without having an establishment there. That's important. Once it creates a subsidiary, then the story is a different one, but it's free, so no authorization can be imposed or can be required. And secondly, maybe even more important, principle of free exercise. No other rules can be applied unless justified by certain grounds, namely public policy, public security, public health and environment, no intellectual property. Intellectual property doesn't qualify. That would be an argument in the framework of the free movement principles, but this is the liberating effect of the Service Directive. You can't rely on intellectual property to restrict free service provision of collecting societies across borders. That's not possible. I will show you where this plays a major role. There is an exception under Article 17, number 11 of the Service Directive for copyright, but the Commission reads it as substantive copyright, not the services provided by collecting societies. Is there a way out, or to play, or to harmonize the Service Directive with the need maybe to also apply the law of the use of the work or the license, whatever? Yes, Article 3, paragraph 1 of the Service Directive allows sector-specific regulation, and then this directive would take priority. I read now in one of the statements from the committees that in the recitals this is alluded to, so this would open the window, and I'm very much in favor of it because it's actually very much needed. Now, why do we need it? Sorry, that's Microsoft. The slides don't look very nicely, and so that happens once you use from one computer to another one. First, let's have a look at exclusive rights and licensing of this. It seems that this would be very fine to a field where we can apply the Service Directive. If we have an authorization in one country, why shouldn't then this collecting society be allowed to grant licenses in another country? But then I would want the European legislator to implement uniform standards of quality of the service. What should be the service? What are the requirements for doing the business of collective rights administration? And then it would be very good to have an authorization system in all member states that are harmonized. Then it's also acceptable for all member states to allow foreign collecting societies to come in, right? For right holders and users both. One big issue which is overlooked is the issue of control of royalty rates. It's one of the most important issues of the regulation of collective rights administration. I give you an example which I found on the internet. There is VG Media, a German collecting society, which is not membership driven. It's a limited society established by German private TV companies, but they also administer the rights of many foreign TV stations nowadays. And this collecting society, it seems to me, I don't have full information, wanted to license, I think, cable retransmission rights directly to cable operators in Spain. And they went to court, they wanted to go to court, and the court there said, well, we don't accept you, you don't have standing because you don't have an authorization from the Spanish Ministry of Culture. Of course, the authorization system maybe is in conflict with the service directive. VG Media sent a letter to the Commission, and the Commission, that's the letter I found on the internet, wrote back and said, this is not acceptable what Spain is doing here, you should be allowed to bring claims in Spain. What is more interesting is that obviously here we have a cross-border business of VG Media in Spain. And of course we have many German-speaking people in Spain, so there is a large market, it seems, for German programs. Both Spain and Germany have special rules on controlling the tariffs of licenses, yes? Does the German law apply? Answer, no. The German system only applies for licenses granted for Germany, but here it's about the use of TV programs in Spain. So only Spanish law would be well established to control this, and also economically to make a judgment how economically valuable those TV programs are in a Spanish market. Right? The Spanish system and the Spanish decision makers, they can decide the case. It's not for German courts or institutions. But Article 16 would make it illegal, because this is control of the exercise. So at the end there would be no tariff control. The Commission proposal provides for such control. There should be control, but actually at the same time, if you argue that the service directive applies to the case, then you don't have any control. It doesn't work. So the Commission is contradictory in making its arguments by not analyzing sufficiently how this works. I know I have to conclude. I can certainly tell you a little bit more about remuneration rights, and you will also, now it's stopped, I can also answer a few questions on multi-territorial licensing. I distributed this question and answers paper, which provides many answers to especially multi-territorial licenses if you are interested in this topic. And another issue which I find very important to discuss, it was mentioned before, this is the issue of the scope of application. How do we define a collecting society? How should other intermediaries, agents, also be covered by the directive? I can see that there's a lot of debate here in Parliament on how to conceive this, and that also the Council is currently developing its opinion on this point. It's a very, very crucial one, which I didn't necessarily want to cover, but I can answer any questions, hopefully. Thank you very much.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank, Herr Drexl. Sie haben, glaube ich, sehr deutlich gemacht, dass Sie und Ihr Institut sich sehr intensiv mit dem Vorschlag der Kommission auseinandergesetzt haben und ja, auch eine ganze Reihe Probleme aufgezeigt, die sich aus dem Vorschlag der Kommission ergeben, wo es Unklarheiten gibt, wo es eigentlich Nachbesserungsbedarf gibt, und wenn man Ihnen so zuhört, könnte man fast den Eindruck haben, es ist ein fast aussichtsloses Unterfangen, die Probleme, die Sie genannt haben, alle wirklich so rechtlich in den Griff zu bekommen, dass sie auch wirklich für alle Beteiligten Klarheit schaffen, wie denn zukünftig damit in Europa umzugehen ist. Ich hoffe aber, wir werden heute auch noch die eine oder andere Antwort darauf finden. Wir können gleich hoffentlich auch noch ein bisschen diskutieren. Ich möchte jetzt erstmal das Wort geben an Beaumont-Nesbitt. Er ist geschäftsführender Direktor des International Music Manager Forums in London, und er wird sicher aus seiner Sicht uns nochmal ein bisschen darstellen, was denn der Vorschlag der Richtlinie speziell für den Musikbereich auch bedeutet. Herr Beaumont-Nesbitt, Sie haben das Wort.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. What we've just heard from Josef was excellent in terms of the detail and the complexity, as has just been alluded to. So I think I might zoom back and give a bit of a macro view of this from the artist experience, that a lot of the artists are very busy creating, writing new songs, performing, out there being creators, and they find it very difficult to engage with the detail on a European directive, or even sometimes just on how their local collection society functions. And I think it's important that we remember that the creators who are represented by a variety of intermediaries in terms of delivering their art, their culture through to consumers, are often outside of the process of deciding how these things are done. It's 10 years this weekend since iTunes launched in the United States, and that rapid change that we've seen of the digital environment in the last 10 years has seen artists have to rise to various challenges on how they create and how they connect to their audiences. And the artists have seen this as a wonderful opportunity. They've been very inspired by digital and how they can reach new audiences and how they can find new ways of getting information back. It's not just the money that flows back through the use of music. There's also information about the consumption, about what fans are thinking. So you can have a dialogue on social media sites such as Facebook, but also learning, for example, from a platform like YouTube, what videos a fan has watched before, what videos they've watched afterwards, what are the links, what are the things that the consumer enjoys, the fan has seen a real strengthening of the understanding between the artist and the fan in the last 10 years. And we've seen this massive disruptive force of digital come and change the way a lot of the business is done. Particularly we've seen, for example, in the music industry, we've seen the trouble that the record shops, the retailers, the bricks and mortar outlets have had. And that massive disruption hasn't necessarily occurred to the artist business model. A lot of the way that artists are funded is based on a pre-digital business model. So they contract with rights holders, they receive investment for contracting with a rights holder, and they then go forward with delivering content to the rights holder who will exploit it. And it sometimes feels as if the collection societies have been left behind as digital services have evolved, because it's not always clear which of these new rights, which of these new areas that digital has bought are going to be administered by collection societies or by rights holders. And the way that the artist gets paid is increasingly pushing away from collective licensing towards direct licensing, towards being an agreement between the artist and an investor, a rights holder, for example, a music producer or a publisher. And it feels that if we could strengthen somehow the collection societies and we could get greater governance and transparency into the collection societies, that not only would the money that could be flowing through them flow more swiftly and efficiently to creators, but also the information, the data in the aggregate that's out there, the usage information, how people are listening to music, how they react to it, how they respond. And the overhauling that needs to be done of collection societies is sometimes daunting, and it's very easy as a creator's representative. So I'm from the International Music Managers Forum. What I do, my day job is, for example, I work with a Dutch band based in Amsterdam who are currently trying to build their career. They've been successful in their domestic market, and they're trying to build their career into Germany, and they're slowly building into France. So our job, the artist representatives, the music managers, is to find better opportunities for the artist, and the artist basically wants to communicate with their audience. So if we're looking for new ways of funding artists, the best way we have to do that is to describe how the artist's content is used, how it's consumed. It's very difficult pulling that information back through collection societies, but it's also incredibly difficult pulling that information back through rights holders. So it's very easy for us, where artists can potentially have representation on boards of collection societies, to point out the flaws with collection societies, to throw rocks at them, and we can pick with any individual country, this is wrong there, this is wrong right there, etc., etc. But the principle behind them, to us, seems so appropriate to the digital era. The aggregation of rights in a simple body, where the users know where to go and find licenses, and where the creators have a role to play in the governance and the processes of running that society that rewards them. So it was interesting hearing the last speaker was talking about some of the scope of the directive has been quite narrowly focused at times. That even occurs within music, that there are elements of, there are collection societies out there that don't handle the author's rights, they handle the performer's rights, the musical performer's rights. And a lot of rights are starting to be withdrawn from those societies that exploit sound recording performance royalties. So a simple way of looking at it, going back to iTunes being downloads, being a copy cached onto somebody's device, in some ways that's a similar process, having a hard copy on your iPod, on your computer, to having a CD or a piece of vinyl. A much more digital, much more natively digital experience for the consumer would be streaming services. We're finding that a lot of the streaming services are being licensed directly by rights holders outside of collection societies. The users, the tech companies, find that much more efficient because they can't necessarily get swiftly licenses from collection societies, but they can do a deal with a rights holder. So we're starting to see in the background, from while the directive is progressing, a migration of rights to new services that replace sometimes the old services. By that I mean that in the old model, if somebody went into a record shop and bought a CD, that transaction flowed outside of the scope of the collection societies, apart from mechanicals, but broadly the flow of money was going straight to the producer, not through a collection society. A service like Spotify, we're not sure if that's a replacement for radio, which would go through a collection society, or for iTunes, a download. And it's very difficult to promote collection societies as the hub for licensing on a pan-European basis when the rights that are in collection societies are sometimes being withdrawn, or there's question marks about what the future of them will be. For example, in music, we're very concerned about the potential withdrawal of the exclusive rights of the authors to their collection societies, which we see as a fundamental, important point in strengthening the collection society for the good of the services. What we would like to do is to encourage a system, not just where the artist gets paid, but where licensing is very much easier for the tech companies. We hear a lot of bad things about some of the big tech companies that are making ridiculous profits and that are doing very well from a number of revenue streams they have. But when we focus on the service providers coming from the tech sector who are just focusing on music, a lot of their business models appear to potentially be unsustainable. Spotify seem to be in a process where nobody's quite sure whether they will survive, whether they will succeed or fail. We don't think necessarily that all of the tech companies who are coming in and asking for licenses for music are making huge fortunes off the back of artists. We think that they're evolving services and evolving new business models. And if we can encourage those services and create new business models, and if the revenues for that can flow back through transparent, well-governed organisations, back to the creators, back to the authors, then we have the potential to start to reach out for new forms of investment. When we go and look at companies outside the music industry who have money to invest in culture, in the creation of content, they're scared of coming and investing in artists because they understand that the experts in the music industry, the publishers, the producers, have had a very difficult time recently. So why would they enter? There's a barrier to disrupting, to the effect of digital in disrupting the business models that artists have. A barrier to artists finding new forms of investment, new funding, is that the music industry has become so stratified and structured based on the old model, and it's very hard for these giant collection societies to move around and embrace the new model. And it's great that the director's looking at that, and we want to help them change, but we passionately support the principle of collection societies and think that if they didn't exist, we were looking at the digital domain, we were looking at issues like pan-European licensing and how the consumer, the fan, moves across borders, likes portability with the content that they've got, likes to interact, likes to share, that collective management would be the best way to deliver the biggest range of licenses and uses to innovative new services that are building that artist-fan relationship. So I think broadly what we're talking about is making the intermediaries between the artist and the fan more efficient. That's a big job with collection societies, with structures, many of which have been around for decades and have built up systems based on the pre-digital world. We'd really like to help them to adjust to this new world, because we think that potentially that will make things a lot easier for digital services to get licenses, which we're very supportive of. And potentially, once we see more business models around it, more use of culture, of creative content, then we can start to restructure the way artists are funded and the contracts and the deals they have. We can progress slowly through with collection societies and make little adjustments here and there as to how they deal with their artists and keep improving that, keep reforming. It's very difficult to do that if all the rights are outside collection societies with the producers and the publishers who built their businesses in a previous business model. We want them to survive. We're not opposed to these companies. They invest in artists, but we haven't seen a radical change in what they do in terms of how they work with artists, how they contract. They've just been worried about how they deal with the digital companies and the tech sector. And that's something we'd really like to move through and look at. There's a point that's also come up today about the Services Directive, which I'm a bit nervous of going too far into because I'm not that technically fluent with it. But broadly, we're always supportive of it being simple. For example, for I represent a Dutch band, so let's use them as an example. We would want it to be simple for a Dutch artist, a Dutch creator, to give their rights into a Dutch society, for that Dutch society to be able to operate, for example, in the UK, to be able to deliver a pan-European license into other markets without having to worry about complying to rules and laws and systems in the other countries. As long as we've got a broadly harmonised pan-European system where we know the norms and the standards, I don't think we need to start forcing on a local case-by-case basis rules and structures onto some of the smaller countries who have less catalogue than the bigger markets and have less commercial power. I think it'd be really interesting as well to hear what everyone else thinks here, so I'm quite keen to leave it there and pick up on the debate. Thank you.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank, vor allen Dingen dafür, dass Sie den Fokus auch noch mal ein bisschen auf die Bedürfnisse der Künstlerinnen und Künstler gelegt haben, dass man ja von Künstlerinnen und Künstlern nicht verlangen kann, dass sie erstmal ein juristisches Studium absolviert haben, um ihre Kunst an den Mann und an die Frau zu bringen, sondern dass es vor allen Dingen darauf ankommt, dass die Systeme einfach, transparent, verständlich sind, trotzdem aber irgendwie die Künstler zu ihrem Geld kommen. Aber dass auch die Verwertungsgesellschaften sich ein Stück weit neu aufstellen müssen und sich den neuen Gegebenheiten, insbesondere des digitalen Marktes, auch anzupassen. Wenn ich so richtig verstanden habe, haben Sie gesagt, die sind teilweise eigentlich ein bisschen altbacken und haben noch nicht so richtig verstanden, wie das neue System funktioniert. Dass man aber natürlich auch schauen muss, wie man ein System hinbekommt, dass es für die Verwerter einfach ist, auch an die Rechte zu kommen. Ich glaube, das war nochmal ganz wichtig, dass Sie diesen Fokus nochmal gelegt haben. Wir kommen sicherlich, hoffe ich, in der Diskussion noch darauf zurück. Wir werden nicht mehr so viel Zeit zum Diskutieren haben. Das ist wie immer bei diesen Veranstaltungen. Ich möchte jetzt erstmal noch das Wort geben an Walter von Holst. Er ist Mitglied von Vrijschrift und er wird uns gleich sicherlich auch noch mal erzählen, was das ist. Aber es ist eine Organisation, die sich für freies Wissen und Kultur einsetzt. Und Herr van Holst, Sie haben das Wort und bitte sagen Sie uns auch noch ein bisschen mehr darüber, was Sie denn tun.
Thank you very much. Vrijschrift is a Dutch NGO which indeed focuses on free access to culture. In the past we've been the European representative of the Gutenberg project, and when they were not that much established in Europe. We've also been kind of a shelter for a while for the OpenStreetMap project, which provides open data, open geodata. Basically, it's kind of an open source equivalent of Google Maps. We've also been heavily involved in the discussion and debates on the software patent directive in 2005. We have very strong ties to the free software community and also to the free culture community. And that's also a bit of our perspective. This is mostly to us about access to culture. And as Madame Castex asked the question, what problem are we have to solve here? I think there are several problems that need to be solved in order to retain both access to culture and the audience. Artists have an audience, as Mr. Beaumont-Nesbitt rightfully said, so this is about having an audience. And I think there's even a wider question of the legitimacy of copyright as a whole, as it stands now. We have several phenomena, convergence of media, so from that perspective it makes little sense, and I do agree with those who say there's too much focus on audiovisual works. It should be a broader directive from that perspective. Even although it's quite rightfully said that the dynamics in, for example, literature are different than from other visual works. But from the convergence perspective, and also stepping to the next subject, digital distribution of works, it will be a bit strange if you would become a new digital distributor in Europe that does music and then moves on to video and e-books, that you will fall inside entirely different regimes as it stands now. There's also this thing which is very dear to our hearts, and that is the emergence of non-royalty based business models, or the mere fact that many creators and artists have reasons not to want remuneration and want to spread their works to be spread as thoroughly as possible. And while I do share some of the concerns expressed by Professor Drexl, the final conclusion in the handout of his presentation I would vehemently argue against. I think the economic viability of a license should not be a criterion at all. To the contrary, one of the bigger problems with the current status quo, which must change, is the fact that authors who want to share their works under a Creative Commons license are effectively forbidden by several collecting rights societies to do so. And this touches upon the autonomy of the artist, who's by the society which should represent the interests of the artist deprived of an audience. And if you don't have an audience, any debate about remuneration is moot anyway. So I would very much argue against such a criterion in any directive whatsoever. In fact, I would emphasize that the underlying principles of the Commission's directive proposal are sound. There are a great deal of details that could have done better, especially in the area of enforcement. And several of the issues raised by Madame Castex, I think, can be addressed by strengthening on the enforcement side. If we, for example, would include an obligation to provide these services, because after all, this is a service managing collecting the license, that no collecting society could decline any artist from becoming a member. That by itself, not unlike the masquerade packages in telecoms, could be a way of providing to empower artists in this area. And there's also this massive issue of governance. And again, not all collective rights management groups or undertakings have these problems. Scandinavia, by and large, works splendidly, but as soon as you get south of Denmark, it becomes a cesspool of corruption and a lack of transparency. And that is detrimental to the income of the artist. It's also very detrimental to the legitimacy of copyright. And from that perspective, I would like to decouple the issue of levies and royalties. The levies systems are, well, from our perspective, not legitimate anyway, but it's a different matter. And any statutory obligation for artists to become a member or be represented by a typical collective rights management society outside the levies debate, well, as soon as you get competition in that area, the governance issues are quite likely to evaporate. There's a vast group of artists who feel underrepresented in the current system. To give an example, GEMA, the German collective rights society for composers. Basically, if you're not a successful artist, you don't get any voting rights. And that touches upon another issue, or another fact of life. We're all becoming artists. So any form of collective rights management for the future must scale to the level that, in fact, every single citizen may be able to find a collective rights society if he or she wishes to do so. Well, I would never want GEMA to represent me because, well, the little things I've done in my life are not likely to generate any royalties to the threshold that will get me any voting rights in GEMA. That doesn't mean that every artist should get the same amount of voting rights in any collecting society, but not having any, and while still being forced to go to the collecting society and having some of your, well, let me say, modest remuneration managed by them, and not even being paid to do so. On an almost daily basis, you see examples of misconduct by collecting rights societies. Venues for bands who are forced to pay money to a collecting rights society, and when the band then asks the collecting rights society, do I get any of that money? The answer is no, it's just too little. It's just being eaten up completely with administrative fees. I think that's a hard story to sell to both the artists and their fans. And something has to go. And from that respect, I very much disagree with Castex. The status quo must change, and the current system, if it is to survive, it must change as well. Staying on this course will, at long term, result in the destruction of the collecting rights societies as a whole. And I agree with Mr. Beaumont-Nesbitt, that's not something we should want. I'd rather have a well-functioning collecting rights management system across Europe than one that at the end is bereft of any legitimacy and then being killed off. And that also gets to the point raised by Professor Drexl, the need for public control. First and foremost, that control should come through the artists. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the directive that says if you're in the business of collectively managing rights, and emphasize collectively managing rights, not being an agent for a particular artist or a particular group of artists, where you provide licensing rights on one basis, then you must be transparent to some way, and that, I think, is a very valid way to address that, is to have a membership-based organization, whether that's a mutuality, a cooperative, or an association, fine. And I also want to emphasize the current proposal actually lacks detail in that direction and should emphasize the right for artists to move their repertoire on a case-by-case basis from collecting rights management, collecting society to another one. And if we want this to work, we also have to work to a scenario in which several collecting societies will be operating in the same territories. And also like to remark on what was raised, the importance that remains of the traditional territorial licensing. Yes, the digital world is there's still a physical world there, But there's also certain circular reasoning in there. The reason why a Polish author has mostly a Polish audience is because the Polish author is not accessible to me as a Dutch potential reader. I don't read Polish, but I might enjoy Polish music. Well, there's hardly any Polish music available in the Netherlands. Likewise, for lots of Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese music, there's almost kind of a completely different spheres within Europe between the well, let's say the more Mediterranean Franco or Latin language families and the more Anglo-Saxon oriented northwestern parts of Europe. I think it's a good thing for cultural diversity to have those cross-border licensing systems, to have that. To contrary to the idea that it will kill cultural diversity. Provided that we add meaningful safeguards that empower artists to actually become the kind of autonomous individuals that can pick and choose which society they want to be represented by, I would say, let's go for this directive. Thank you.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank auch für diesen Fokus nochmal, auch auf die Frage, welche Rechte sollten Künstlerinnen und Künstler haben. In einem Punkt, den Sie angesprochen haben, finde ich, hat meine Kollegin Helga Trübel, die für den Kulturausschuss Berichterstatterin ist, einen guten Vorschlag gemacht, wie ich finde, dass sie nämlich gesagt hat, wir müssen es den Künstlern ausdrücklich auch erlauben über die Richtlinie, dass sie frei entscheiden können, welche Teile ihres Repertoires sie an eine Verwertungsgesellschaft geben und welche Teile sie auch frei als freie Lizenz irgendwo zur Verfügung stellen wollen, ohne dass die Verwertungsgesellschaft sagen kann, das dürft ihr jetzt aber nicht, weil du hast dich sozusagen in unsere Hände begeben und deshalb entscheiden wir jetzt, was wie verteilt wird, sondern dass der Künstler letztlich immer noch sein Recht über sein eigenes Werk auch behält. Ich glaube, das ist ein ganz wichtiger Ansatz und da würde ich mich auch sehr freuen, wenn der Rechtsausschuss den übernehmen würde, weil ich glaube, das ist ein vernünftiger Ansatz, weil der Künstler hat das Werk geschaffen und er muss letztlich darüber entscheiden können, was mit diesem Werk passiert und er muss auch entscheiden können, ob er sich einer Verwertungsgesellschaft anschließen möchte oder ob er das selber verbreiten möchte, was viele Künstler nicht wollen, weil es einfach auch sehr kompliziert ist. Aber es muss in der Macht des Künstlers liegen, was mit seinem Werk passiert und wie er es verbreiten möchte und ob er das über eine Verwertungsgesellschaft tun will oder nicht und welche Teile er vielleicht auch frei zur Verfügung stellen will. Deshalb glaube ich, ist das ein guter Vorschlag. So, jetzt haben wir noch ein bisschen Zeit für die Diskussion. Ich glaube, wir haben viele Anregungen, viele Aspekte, sowohl rechtlicher Art, aber auch sehr praktischer Art gehört. Ich glaube, es gibt viele Punkte, wo wir sehen, dass da noch deutlicher Nachbesserungsbedarf in der Richtlinie besteht, sowohl was die praktischen als auch was die reinen rechtlichen Fragen angeht. Aber Ihre Fragen, Ihre Anmerkungen, feuerfrei. Wer mag zuerst? Ja, bitte.
Mein Name ist Gernot Graninger, ich bin Direktor der österreichischen Verwertungsgesellschaft AKM und ich habe eine Frage an Herrn Drexl zum Thema Dienstleistungsrichtlinie. Ich möchte aber die Gelegenheit auch benutzen, Frau Castex sehr herzlich zu danken, dass sie sich dieses Themas annimmt, weil es ihr Standpunkt der einzig richtige ist, dass wir nicht kommerzielle Unternehmen sind, die ausschließlich treuhändig im Interesse der Bezugsberechtigten arbeiten und man daher nicht über den Kamm scheren kann und die Stereotype Wettbewerbsbrille für Verwertungsgesellschaften aufsetzen kann. Herr Drexl, wenn ich Sie richtig verstanden habe, haben Sie gesagt, dass die Dienstleistungsrichtlinie an sich nicht anwendbar sein sollte, also die Tatsache, dass es grenzüberschreitende Nutzungen gibt, dieses Thema wieder in den Raum hereinbringt. Ich habe diese Unterscheidung zwischen nationalen und internationalen Nutzungen und Lizenzen sehr interessant gefunden. Meinen Sie, dass der Standpunkt denkbar wäre, dass bei internationalen Nutzungen die Anwendbarkeit der Dienstleistungsrichtlinie vielleicht eine größere Rolle spielen könnte als bei nationalen, wo der Wettbewerb ja de facto nicht vorhanden ist und daher die Dienstleistungsrichtlinie eine verschwindende Rolle spielt? Könnten Sie sich zu einem Standpunkt anschließen?
Wenn nichts dagegen spricht, würde ich gerne ein bisschen sammeln und dann am Ende nochmal allen die Möglichkeit geben. Ich habe gerade gehört, wir müssen relativ pünktlich den Raum verlassen, weil der Präsident hier eine Sitzung hat und den Präsidenten des Parlaments darf man nicht verärgern. Gibt es weitere Nachfragen? Sonst. Ja, bitte.
Thank you very much. Petra from the European Composer and Songwriter Alliance. Very briefly, and I applaud the representative of the music managers, and I'm very happy that we are on the same line here. The exclusive assignment of the performing right is of fundamental importance. So I agree with the Commission's first proposal that you can restore different categories of rights, but within the category, notably the performing rights, you have to assign it exclusively. If this is not the case, there's a rights grab, and the rights will be taken by the publishing assignment, where we have and where the songwriters have no transparency at all. So please bear this in mind, and the opinion of Drexl, the language is fine, but to split it into works is detrimental and would destroy the entire system we have in Europe. So I just wanted to give this as a point. I wanted also to ask Professor Drexl how you see this. Thank you.
My name is Prof, and I'm representing GESAC, the European Collective Management Societies. I would like to follow up from what just Patrick said. I think we believe it's an important issue as well, but I understand the concern about both Mrs. Drexl's proposition and also your propositions about accommodating Creative Commons type of licenses or the choices of the right holders. This is exactly about what the societies are trying to do, to give choice to their right holders, but also at the same time collectively protect them against the users. Many of the societies have already provided pilot systems for Creative Commons licenses, and it's on the way in many others. So this is an issue that can be handled within the societies by way of the agreement of the right holders with the societies when there's a demand for that one. But it does not necessarily require the possibility for work-by-work basis withdrawal of the rights, which is really only work for the major users, major media companies, who would like to grab the rights and then really exploit it against the will of the right holders by devaluing the rights and also devaluing the value of the blanket licenses provided by the right holders themselves. So I think that's a very important issue politically and legally. It can be solved within societies by way of demand of the right holders for that one, but it does not require work-by-work basis withdrawal. And then it can, I mean, this exclusivity of the mandates needs to be protected. Thank you.
Ja, vielleicht habe ich mich gerade auch ein bisschen unklar ausgedrückt. Ich glaube, wenn ich den Vorschlag von Frau Drexl richtig verstanden habe, geht es auch nicht darum, dass man jetzt so eine Art Cherry-Picking macht und immer guckt, wo kann ich denn meinen einzelnen Song oder mein einzelnes Werk am besten vermarkten und verwerten, sondern ihr ging es vor allen Dingen darum zu sagen, wenn ein Künstler sagt, ich möchte ein Werk frei zur Verfügung stellen und auch kostenlos zur Verfügung stellen, dass dann nicht eine Verwertungsgesellschaft sagen darf, das darfst du jetzt aber nicht, weil du mir sozusagen die Verwertung deiner Rechte abgetreten hast, sondern das, so habe ich sie zumindest verstanden, weil ich glaube schon, dass wir ein Stück weit aufpassen müssen, dass die Verwertungsgesellschaften nicht, die haben es gestern im Ausschuss formuliert, dass die Verwertungsgesellschaften nicht zur Resterampe werden und die lukrativen Rechte an irgendwelche Global Player, Big Player, an Musikagenturen vergeben werden und der Rest sozusagen dann bei den Verwertungsgesellschaften bleibt und die dann, ich sag mal so, das kleine nationale Repertoire noch irgendwie verwalten dürfen und alles das, was wirklich Geld bringt, dann in anderen Gesellschaften ausgelagert ist. Ich denke, das geht nicht und da ist, glaube ich, das wäre eine Frage, die ich noch anschließen würde. Das ist ein Problem, was ich auch in der Richtlinie sehe, in dem Entwurf, dass wir zwar sehr strikte Transparenzregeln und Regeln für die Verwertungsgesellschaften haben, wir aber alle wissen, dass es neben den Verwertungsgesellschaften ja auch andere Modelle in Europa inzwischen gibt, nicht nur die Big Player, sondern auch kleinere Musikagenturen, die dann diesen Rechten nicht unterworfen sind, was natürlich letztendlich in dem System auch wieder zu einer Wettbewerbsverzerrung der unterschiedlichen Player führen kann, die, glaube ich, auch nicht gewollt sein kann. Und da hätte ich gerne auch nochmal Ihre Position zugehört, wie Sie das einschätzen. Wenn jetzt keine mehr sind, dann würde ich noch eine Runde machen. Ich weiß nicht, wer anfangen möchte. Wollen Sie nochmal? Herr von Holst.
Thank you. I think the last issue that is the one which is more relevant for me to answer. Yes, as far as I'm concerned, we are concerned, just an exceptional exclusivity merely for putting things in the public domain or Creative Commons license would be enough, although at the same time I think the issue brought up is more fundamental and should be addressed, and that's something that the Commission has not done in this directive, is the issue of the authors' agreements with the publishers. And I think there's a real dire need for legislation at the European level that reduces the imbalance in power between the intermediaries and artists. And since we can't fix this at this table, I'm afraid, I would say, by and large, I will be against exclusivity for the collective rights society. But given the background of the current practices of many large intermediaries and the imbalance between the artists and them, I would easily live with an exclusion and with merely an exception to the exclusivity of the collective rights societies that encompasses the free culture movement.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank. Das war, glaube ich, auch nochmal eine wichtige Klarstellung. Herr Beaumont-Nesbitt.
I think there's also a, from the potential service providers as well, that it's important to them to know when they've got a license what rights, what catalogue has been given to them, what the collection society owns, what is outside of the scope of that.
Yes, that's something I didn't bring up in my earlier part because it did not take too much time. But one of the areas in which the Commission's proposal could be improved is to make it mandatory for collecting rights societies to publish what repertoire they do represent. That also allows much more on a case-by-case basis to artists to kind of benchmark which collecting rights societies are best for us, because you can then at least look at how many works are represented, how much remuneration gets to the artist, and for the users, which are increasingly artists themselves, it's easy to see with what society they have to deal with or not.
That then is also virtuous for the artists, that they then start to get a better flow of information back about usage, and again it goes beyond just the value being monetary here. It becomes part of this new ecosystem that we're seeing emerge. And the confidence and availability of data is great for users and great for the artists.
Herr Drexl.
I'm very grateful for all these questions, which are highly important. I would like to start with the question relating to exclusive assignment of rights to collective rights management organizations, which coincides with the other concerns that nowadays many publishers or producers require authors to withdraw their rights in order to assign the rights to them. And this coincides with the argument on exclusive assignment or non-exclusive assignment, because it's the same, basically the same problem. The Commission makes this wonderful statement that right holders should be free to choose between different collecting societies. That's a principle that we don't have to state. It's there, because these are private rights. The right holder is free to contract with any other person, basically. So choose, fine. But the problem is the imbalance of power, bargaining power. That's the big problem. At the beginning I said I'm very much in favor of competition law. There's one point where competition law, European competition law, is not very well established, and that's exactly the point regarding exclusive assignment. Should right holders be obliged to assign their rights exclusively to a collecting society? The benefit of this is that then the publishing companies and the big users are not able to circumvent the collecting societies, because then they get the license only from the collecting societies They cannot approach directly the right holder to get a license from the right holder. And this protects the right holder, because then we won't have a buyout. The collecting society will guarantee that a certain portion of the income will actually go to the right holder. So there's a very, very strong argument in favor of the possibility of exclusive assignment. Internet has made it much more complex, and at the same time I'm in favor of the proposal by Ms. Trüppel, who basically makes the argument, but authors nowadays should also be free to put their work on the internet, to make it publicly available. I'm in favor of doing this. I'm not against it, really. Who is the most famous musician nowadays? That's a guy coming from South Korea. He became famous on YouTube. He's against GEMA. GEMA is blocking his video on the internet. That's your example, and I fully agree with you that there is a problem in this regard, and the proposal by Ms. Trüppel takes care of such interests. But at the same time, we also have to protect right holders, the authors, against the bargaining power of the big industry players. And that's very, very important. And to find a balance between the two is not so easy. And unfortunately, the proposal doesn't achieve this balance. One might have think about, well, maybe we can have more scope for the service directive with regard to areas where we have cross-border licensing, or where we have international cases, because then maybe also we have more choice. That's certainly true, but still this does not mean that we don't need state control, and we need state control from different perspectives. Take the example, for example, statutory remuneration rights with a private copying levy. And just imagine, hypothetical, the French collecting society decides, well, we can also collect the copyright levy in Belgium. In Belgium, half of the country is French speaking. We can do this also for French literature. Let's do this. And then maybe you have different percentages distributed to the authors in the different countries. And then the publishers go to the country where the portion for the publishers is biggest. So the choice will immediately harm the authors. And then they tell the authors, you have to withdraw your rights and also go to this collecting society. And this collecting society will do the job. This would have an immediate impact on what the authors get. So also in this field, we don't know about the future. At the moment, we don't have this scenario, but the proposal would allow this. And with the service directive, if we go too far and give too much scope to the service directive, I don't know what will come next, especially Austria. We have the big collecting societies in Germany. Maybe tomorrow they are in Austria.
Ja, bitte.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Kammerevert, Philipp Rosset von der GEMA. Ich wollte nur eine ganz kurze Ergänzung noch vornehmen, also weil die GEMA mehrfach jetzt angesprochen wurde. Also die GEMA blockt selbst keine Videos bei YouTube, sondern wir haben uns bisher eben nicht auf den Tarif einigen können. Insofern blockiert YouTube diese Videos, wenn überhaupt, dann selber. Und noch zu der Mitbestimmung bei der GEMA ist es so, dass alle Mitglieder in der Mitgliederversammlung ihre Interessen einbringen können. Es ist aber natürlich richtig, dass weniger erfolgreiche Mitglieder über ein System von Delegierten sozusagen ihre Stimme dort einbringen können. Und das Wichtige ist ja bei der Verteilung, dass eben die Verteilung oder die Ausschüttung ohne Diskriminierung erfolgen. Und das ist bei der GEMA auch der Fall, also nach den gleichen Regeln für alle Mitglieder. Genau, also wollte ich nur noch ganz kurz.
Ja, Herr Verwertungsgesellschaften.
Well, I hate to defend Google here, because it's not necessarily our friend. But Psy is not a GEMA member. I mean, as we quickly stated, it doesn't give a care whatsoever on how many video has appeared, because he wanted the audience. And GEMA is actually kind of asking an extortionary license fee from Google for their, well, basically it is apparently more than Google earns on that. And that's a debate on, this is going back and forth, but it proves the issue, because if GEMA members will be free to choose what rights, what collection society represent their rights, they could actually see which members really want to, not want to be on YouTube. And like I said, I'm not particularly fond of Google, especially on the privacy side. But this is kind of a debate between two elephants, with both the authors and the users are being scrambled.
Ja, aber das ist ja letztlich genau das Problem, was wir eben schon mal angesprochen haben. Kann ein Künstler entscheiden, dass Teile seines Repertoires frei im Internet verfügbar sind, oder kann er das nicht? Und die Frage nochmal an Herrn Drexl, kriegen wir dieses Problem über diese Richtlinie gelöst, ohne, ich sag mal, viele weitere Probleme damit aufzumachen, die wir dann nicht wieder eingefangen kriegen?
In principle, the solution can already be found in European competition law as applied by the European Commission. The author has a right, and it needs to be granted and recognized by the collecting societies that the author can withdraw the rights and administer the rights by him or herself, especially in view of online use. That was the Duft case where this was established. So this is already established as part of European law. We don't need anything more in this regard. The open question really is whether whether we can have more control on what the right holders can do with regard to licenses regarding other users or publishers, because in this regard the right holder needs protection, right? And I heard about such cases also in Germany, that the big industries are nowadays presenting contracts with the authors and even require them to get out of the collecting societies, and that's quite a horror. So this should not happen, because they hope to get cheaper licenses.
Eine können wir noch und dann müssen wir leider abbrechen.
Na, vielen Dank. Ich wollte noch mal ganz kurz zurückkommen. Zum einen das Beispiel Google und GEMA, Elefant und Elefant. Ich meine, das eine ist der Elefant und das andere ist die Maus. Also sind wir uns ehrlich, ich glaube, das hält nicht. Und das zweite ist sozusagen auch die Terminologie. Ich meine, in Excel wir vertreten professionelle Komponisten und Textdichter und Songwriter. Und Herr Professor, die exklusive Übertragung, wie Sie richtig gesagt haben, der Aufführungsrechte, das schützt die Mitglieder nicht nur aus dem Verlagsvertrag, aber sondern auch, dass die Repertoires, ob jetzt verlegt in einem multinationalen oder in einem kleinen Repertoire, auf gleichen Lizenz- und Tarifsbänden lizenziert werden. Das heißt, es ist von der kulturellen Vielfalt so wichtig. Darum sind wir ein bisschen nervös jetzt mit dem Vorschlag von der Frau Trüppel, weil sie auf der einen Seite natürlich die kulturelle Vielfalt und die Sprache sehr gut ist, aber hier eine Möglichkeit öffnet, dass man sozusagen das aufsplittet, wo wir dann eigentlich die exklusive Übertragung verlieren. Und da sind wir von der UK bis nach Serbien, die Mitglieder, die wir vertreten, alle derselben Meinung, dass das ist fundamental und da bitten wir Sie wirklich, bitte hören Sie uns. Ich glaube, ich habe es jetzt zum zweiten Mal gesagt, aber wollte es noch einmal verdeutlichen. Vielen Dank.
Herr Drexl, kurz, bitte.
Yes, directly on this, I read her proposal on my flight. And it was very early in the morning, so maybe I got it wrong. But as I understood it, her idea is that the rights are still in the collecting society, but at the same time the author retains the possibility to make the work available on the internet for free access.
For free access, yes.
So it's not, so the globality of the repertoire would still maintained. So it's the work is not taken out from the repertoire. That's how I understood it, but maybe I'm wrong and I remember incorrectly. And then it would be a different case. But I would prefer my understanding, if I may say so.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank. Genauso habe ich das auch verstanden, was Helga Tüppel gestern auch im Ausschuss gesagt hat. Aber ich glaube, wir werden das uns unter diesem Gesichtspunkt auch nochmal sehr genau angucken, ob da möglicherweise an anderen Stellen Probleme auftauchen, die wir vielleicht so noch nicht gesehen haben. Ich muss jetzt leider schließen und ich will auch nicht den Versuch unternehmen, das, was wir jetzt hier 2 Stunden diskutiert haben, nochmal in irgendeiner Form zusammenzubinden. Aber ich glaube, das war eine sehr spannende und gute Diskussion, die auch nochmal die sehr unterschiedlichen Facetten, die dieses Thema hat, uns dreien, die wir damit befasst sind, nochmal wirklich mit auf den Weg gegeben hat. Ich habe mitgenommen, dass wir die Frage der Kontrolle, der staatlichen Kontrolle auch nochmal sehr genau unter die Lupe nehmen müssen. Ich habe mitgenommen, dass wir die Frage auch der Transparenz, auch im Sinne der Künstlerinnen und Künstler nochmal sehr genau uns anschauen müssen, dass wir nochmal gucken müssen, wie wir das mit der Dienstleistungsrichtlinie, da hat Herr Drexl uns, glaube ich, einen guten Vorschlag gemacht, wie man das Problem vielleicht lösen kann. Ich danke allen Referentinnen und Referenten für ihre Statements, für ihre Anregungen. Danke allen Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmern dafür, dass Sie hier waren. Ich hoffe, auch für Sie war diese Diskussion anregend. Danke Ihnen auch für den einen oder anderen Hinweis, den Sie uns noch gegeben haben und wünsche Ihnen allen einen schönen Tag und ich hoffe, dass wir eine gute Lösung finden werden und ganz herzlichen Dank auch nochmal an unsere Dolmetscherinnen und Dolmetscher. Sie haben uns sehr geholfen. Vielen Dank.
Herzlichen Dank.